We are ready for notes on the Landlady, day 2. Since we haven't read that much yet, Friday we read like 2 sentences. We'll just start back over at the beginning, but just know that there are a couple things to have in your notes already. You need to have that the story is taking place in Bath, England, that it is night about 9 p.m. and it is deadly cold. There are no students here with me right now, so I will pause when I would have asked you a question if you were in class. Please, think about the answer. I know it might seem kind of weird, but I'm asking you things that I want you to think about and see if you know the answer to. Because that's what you'd have to be doing if you were here in class. That's how you're going to understand. So this video will actually be short compared to how fast it would go in class, just because you don't have all the kids talking or all wanting to share stories or share their opinions. It's not going to be quite the same as if you were here, but it's the best we can do. So here's a reminder of the language artsy parts of the story that we're paying attention to. We are taking notes on summarizing and predicting on one side of your paper. And we're taking notes on characters and setting on the other side so that you can work on creating a visual in your head of things that you are reading about. And I will stop and take notes with you so you do not have to guess exactly what to write down. Okay. Okay. The Landlady. Billy Weaver had traveled down from London on the slow afternoon train. And by the time he got to Bath, it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and the moon was coming up out of a clear, starry sky over the houses opposite the station entrance. But the air was deadly cold, and the wind was like a flat blade of ice on his cheeks. Remember that switch word? It was a pretty pleasant description at the start, talking about the nice slow afternoon train. Everything was running on time, though. He got to Bath. It was a clear night, so the stars were out, the moon was up. I think that's supposed to be a pretty positive description. And then, remember the rule? Look out for buts. Buts can be trouble. But is a signal word that a switch is coming. It could be a switch from bad back to good, or it could be a switch from good to bad, left to right, fast to slow. It's a switch. So regardless, pay attention because something is changing. Where are you headed? And they did switch to something a little more unpleasant, that the air was deadly cold. Not just cold, deadly cold. And the wind was like blades of ice on his cheeks. So that's why we added that to your setting notes. That seems pretty significant. Excuse me, but is there a fairly cheap hotel not too far away from here? Try the Bell and Dragon, the porter answered, pointing down the road. They might take you in. It's about a quarter of a mile along the other side. Billy thanked him, picked up his suitcase, and set out to walk the quarter mile to the Bell and Dragon. Pause again because Billy asked for a cheap hotel, and the porter thought of a place called the Bell and Dragon. Please make sure you are not imagining something like this. That is not what hotels would have looked like during this time period. The Bell and Dragon is most likely a pub, which is a affordable place for people to stay who are traveling, especially if they were, a young single man who just needed something to eat and a place to sleep. It was a restaurant on the bottom, like a bar kind of restaurant, and it's just some rooms above it. Very simple. Come sleep there and then leave. And so again, it's called the Bell and Dragon. It's a quarter of a mile away, and so Billy's going to head that direction. Billy thanked him and picked up his suitcase and set out to walk the quarter mile to the Bell and Dragon. He had never been to Bath before. He didn't know anyone who lived there. But Mr. Greenslade at the head office in London had told him it was a splendid city. Find your own lodgings, then go along and report to the branch manager as soon as you've got yourself settled. The only clue from that paragraph is that Billy has been sent to Bath by somebody called Mr. Greenslade from the head office. All we know so far is that Billy works in some kind of office job and was sent to Bath from London for his job. And he's in charge of finding his own place to stay and then getting started the next morning, reporting to work. The next paragraph is going to give us information about Billy. So listen and think about what you would put in the notes. Billy was 17 years old. He was wearing a new navy blue overcoat, a new brown trilby hat, and a new brown suit. And he was feeling fine. He walked briskly down the street. He was trying to do everything briskly these days. Briskness, he had decided, was the one common characteristic of all successful businessmen. The big shots up at head office were absolutely fantastically brisk all the time. They were amazing. So what did we learn about Billy? First of all, we learned that he was 17. We learned that you don't know his exact job, but we know it's some kind of businessman. Oops, I already wrote that. We know that he has been transferred or promoted for work. I need to write that twice. He was at the London head office and he got moved to Bath. That could have just been a transfer, but since he's so young, he was probably only like an intern or something before. Now he's a brand new big kid businessman. He has his first big kid job, which is why it matters that his appearance, he's got all those new clothes and he is feeling super cool. He's looking all fancy. He's got his big kid job. They trust him to move to a new town to represent them from London. Plus, he is doing the number one thing he has decided makes you a good businessman. Did you catch that? He had been observing all the businessmen at the head office and had decided that the number one thing that made them great at what they do was that they were brisk. And brisk is a speed and a manner that you do something in. You're usually moving quick, like you're very important and very busy and cannot be bothered to stop or slow down or speak to anybody. You've got to just keep moving. Very busy, very important. And so Billy has decided to try to do that. To always be moving briskly. Who knows if he's actually good at business, but we know he can move fast. Okay, The next section is going to explain where he's walking a little bit and kind of start to get into um, his fear, which I can say without feeling like I'm spoiling anything because that is the name of the unit, Facing Fears. The essential question is what can happen when you face your fears. So if you honestly didn't know he was going to face a fear, I don't know. It was supposed to be obvious. Okay. There were no shops on this wide street that he was walking along, only a line of tall houses on each side, all of them identical. They had porches and pillars and 4 or 5 steps going up to their front doors. And it was obvious that once upon a time, they had been very swanky residences. But now, even in the darkness, he could see that the paint was peeling from the woodwork on their doors and windows, and that the handsome white porches were cracked and blotchy from neglect, meaning no one took care of them. Suddenly, in a downstairs window that was brilliantly illuminated by a street light, Billy caught sight of a printed notice propped up against the glass in one of the upper panes. It said, "Bed and breakfast." There was a vase of yellow flowers, tall and beautiful, standing just underneath the notice. He stopped walking. He moved a bit closer. Green curtains, some sort of velvety material, were hanging down on either side of the window. Their chrysanthemum flowers looked wonderful beside them. He went right up and peered through the glass into the room, and the first thing he saw was a bright fire burning in the fireplace. On the carpet in front of the fire, a pretty little dachshund was curled up asleep with its nose tucked in its belly. A dachshund's like a wiener dog. The room itself, so far as he could see in the half darkness, was filled with pleasant furniture. There was a baby grand piano and a big sofa and several plump armchairs, and in one corner he spotted a large parrot in a cage. Animals were usually a good sign in a place like this, Billy told himself. And all in all, it looked to him as though it would be a pretty decent house to stay in. So Billy was on his way to the Bell and Dragon. He was on his way to the pub. He got stalled by looking at this bed and breakfast sign and then looking in the window. Think to yourself, if you've ever heard of a bed and breakfast, can you make an inference about what one is based on the name? A bed and breakfast is someone's home. It is a place to stay. It is kind of like a hotel, except it's somebody's home. They live there. They've got their bedroom area, a kitchen, a living room, but they have extra rooms. And so they rent those rooms out to people. If you were traveling and you want to stay in a place, you could choose a bed and breakfast. Some people still own them around. But you stay in one of their rooms and you go eat breakfast the next morning in their kitchen, and then you go. So he got sidetracked looking at this bed and breakfast. And he tells us, he literally says, this would be a pretty decent house to stay in. All these things inside are looking pretty good. So when we're thinking of our transition words, our switch words, which direction would your thumb be pointing for Billy and this bed and breakfast so far? Is it being described as a thumbs up, as a positive thing, or thumbs down, negative thing? You should be thinking thumbs up because, first of all, again, he said this is a great place, but also the warm fire when it's deadly cold outside, the snuggly puppy, a piano, some fluffy armchairs. It's a nice place to be. So how about when I tell you the next word is but? He had thought this place would be more comfortable than the Bell and Dragon. But on the other hand, a pub would be more friendly than a bed and breakfast because there would be beer and darts in the evening and lots of people to talk to. And it would probably be a lot cheaper too. He had stayed a couple nights in a pub before and he had liked it. He had never stayed in any bed and breakfast. And to be perfectly honest, he was a tiny bit frightened of them. The name itself brought up images in his head of watery cabbage and greedy landladies and the overwhelming smell of kippers in the living room. Careful. Had he ever been to a bed and breakfast before? The answer is no, he's never been to one before. So does he know for sure these things are in a bed and breakfast? No, it doesn't say that either. He's imagining when he says bed and breakfast, these are the things that pop into his head. He imagines these are the things that could be there, kind of like what you might have done before you came to middle school. You'd never been here before, but maybe you had ideas of what it could be like. So if you were to meet Billy on the street and ask him, hey, Billy, what is your number one fear? What would he say? The answer is not bed and breakfasts. It's not exactly a bed and breakfast that scares him because he doesn't know what one is. He's never been there before. But that's just it. That's the problem. He's never been there before. So the idea of going to one freaks him out. So you could word it as, not to stick a Frozen song in your head or anything, but his fear is the unknown or strangers or new places. These three things are what would make a bed and breakfast scary to him. He hasn't been to a B&B. But please don't start telling yourself he's afraid of bed and breakfasts. He's not. I mean, he is afraid of this one because he's never been there before. But it's not like, okay, my top 3 fears are spiders, tacos, and bed and breakfasts. No, it's just things he's not familiar with. Okay. So let's see what he does about that fear. He's still standing outside the window, looking in, wondering about this place. And after standing like this in the cold for 2 or 3 minutes, Billy decided he would walk on and take a look at the Bell and Dragon before making up his mind. So that's what he decided, guys. He decided to move on. Take a look and then, decide. But a strange thing happened to him. He had stepped away. He had turned from the window when all at once his eye was caught and held in the strangest manner by the small notice that was there. Bed and breakfast, bed and breakfast, bed and breakfast, each word like a large black eye staring at him through the glass, holding him, forcing him to stay where he was and not to walk away from that house. And the next thing he knew, he was actually moving from the window to the door, climbing the front steps that led to it and reaching for the bell. He pressed the bell. Far away in a dark room, in the back room, he heard it ringing. Then at once, it must have been at once because he hadn't even had time to take his finger off the button, the door swung open and a woman was standing there. Normally, you ring the bell and you have to wait at least half a minute before the door opens. But this lady was like a jack in the box. He pressed the bell and out she popped. It made him jump. She was about 55 years old, and the moment she saw him, she gave him a warm, welcoming smile. Please come in. She stepped aside, holding the door wide open, and Billy found himself automatically starting forward into the house. The desire to follow after her into that house was extraordinarily strong. I saw the notice in the window, he said, holding himself back. Yes, I know. I was wondering about a room. It's all ready for you, my dear. She had a round pink face and very gentle blue eyes. I was on my way to the Bell and Dragon, but the notice in your window just happened to catch my eye. My dear boy, why don't you come in out of the cold? How much do you charge? 5 and 6 pence a night, including breakfast. It was fantastically cheap. It was less than half of what he had been willing to pay. Well, if that's too much, then perhaps I can reduce it just a tiny bit. Do you desire an egg for breakfast? Eggs are expensive at the moment. It would be 6 pence less without the egg. 5 and 6 pence is fine. I should like very much to stay here. I knew you would. Do come in. She seemed terribly nice. She looked exactly like the mother of your best friend from school, welcoming you into their house for Christmas. Billy took off his hat and stepped over the threshold. So that was kind of long. We know that he thinks she's about 55. No, teenagers aren't great at guessing ages, but she's older. She has a very nice face, blue eyes, pink cheeks. He was nervous about a few things. Remember what had made him nervous about bed and breakfast? He didn't know what to expect. He didn't like strangers. He was worried it would be run by a greedy lady landlord. But it turns out he asked her right away what she charged. And I don't know what 5 and 6 pence is exactly. So I just waited to see what Billy would say. And yes, he said it was really cheap. Like he would have been willing to pay twice that. So I guess it doesn't really matter what 5 and 6 pence is. It's cheap. Billy can afford it. And he has like no money. So it seems like a good place to stay. He's in there now. He has stepped inside. So tomorrow we'll start by making sure we have the notes about the landlady. And then we'll see what she's all about, what the stay is like. Take some notes about the house. And that will be day 3.